Well, from time to time here in Vernon Hills, we take a moment to talk to some of the folks who can tell us about the history of our village, some of the stories of our community. We're kind of a young community, but we do have a lot of stories. We're with a couple people who can tell us quite a bit. We're with Roger Byrne and Barbara Williams. Roger, as you're aware, or you should be aware, is our village president, also known as the mayor, and he also served as trustee. Barbara is a current trustee, and she has been the mayor of Vernon Hills. So between you guys, you've been around for quite a while and seen a lot of things happen. A lot of exciting things. I'm sure some of the things you can't tell us all the story about it. But let's start by finding out, when did you guys even come to town? I mean, have you been here for years or for forever?
Yes.
Yeah?
I moved here in '77, in April of '77.
I moved here in '77 also.
Yeah.
Oh,
I think it was maybe May.
Yeah.
May or June.
Right.
You know.
Well, and what brought you here? I mean, why did you come here? Because it certainly was not as big of a town as it was.
No.
There was not as
no.
much development. What was it like then?
My wife, Kathy, was teaching school at Green Bay School in North Chicago. She was an elementary school teacher. And I just said, I was working downtown at the time, and I said, just get me relatively close to a train, which we didn't have a train,
Right.
commuter train then. So I used to take the train out of Deerfield, or sometimes Libertyville, or sometimes Lake Forest, and then she drove. It was about 11 miles to her school. So
Kind of split the difference a little bit then.
not really. I moved. I didn't want her. I would have probably bought something out in Elmhurst, because I'm originally from the south side.
Okay.
So that would have been a big move up for me, going that far north into Elmhurst. But Vernon Hills was like another country.
Oh, I know.
Was that how?
I
I
agree.
remember people
Yeah.
saying like they didn't think there was anything between here and, like, I don't know, Milwaukee. They thought it was just nothing. So,
Nothing. It was nothing.
yeah. So
Absolutely
how'd you
nothing.
get here then?
Well, two reasons. Number one, my husband's company was relocating to Bannockburn, the company he was working for at the time. So I started checking school districts, and District 73 was quite well liked, had great reviews, if you will. And I came up and went visiting over at the school and met Tom Oakson, who was superintendent at the time. And then we started looking around, and we ended up here.
Huh. Well, and a lot of people
it's
did that.
convenient.
Well, and talk about the communities, because really, in the 70s, what were the neighborhoods that were here? We didn't have Greg's Landing, because that wasn't
No.
until,
You had New Century Town. You
New
had
Century Town starting.
the original section, which
Right.
was Country Club Estates, and then you had Deer Path.
Deer Path was
Deer
just
Path
going
was
in,
starting,
just
right.
coming in.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of the west side of Deer Path was starting, because I forgot about that. My daughter's godfathers, they bought in Deer Path on Annapolis, like 2 months after we bought, when they were coming out to visit us and knew where we were at, and just swung by the office and ended up buying
Buying
a
a
home.
home,
So
buy a
they
house
moved
on
out
the
here
way.
also.
Yeah. The preponderance of the homes were built by Levitt, but you also had Midway builders who did about 86 homes, and
Yep.
my wife and I bought one, which was on Merrimack, and
Right.
they were also on, I want to say, Tela Vista Court. They were on
Yep.
part of Monterey. They were on part of Deer Path.
Right.
It was a limited number of homes, and
Well, and what's the deal with the Deer Path names? I've heard that they're named after stuff in Lake Forest. I've heard they're just named any M name you can think of.
I am totally remiss. I don't know. I don't.
I don't
It's
think it's all
a
over the
legitimate
place.
question.
All over.
It was probably something that wasn't,
Yeah.
hard to get a copyright on or something. I don't know.
Of course, everything north of Sullivan and west of Deer Path starts with an A.
Yeah, so it's the
Yeah,
A's
yeah,
and the
yeah,
M's.
yeah.
Every
Yeah.
street over there starts
Yeah, we got
with
the
an A.
M's and the A's and,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so on and
yeah,
so
yeah.
forth.
And,
but-
and how long I've
strange.
lived here since '95, and I still get a little lost when I start going through some of the neighborhoods where I live. I
Yeah.
don't know why.
Yes,
so.
yes.
Well, you were just talking about the schools too, Barb. Oakson, that's that. You can see a sign out in front of the South Campus Schools, Oakson out
Oakson
there.
campus, right.
But we did not have as many buildings there. There's
Oh,
been kind
no.
of a boom
Oh, no.
over time. But you were telling
Absolutely.
a story before we turned the cameras on that how years and years ago it started with Sam Insel giving money and building a school.
Building the ones building.
But when they
right.
needed schools in, was that the 70s or 80s?
It was
what
before I moved out here, because they were building the kindergarten building on Hawthorne Parkway at the time. The newest building to the west was the kindergarten building, and it opened 2 years after I moved out here. So I
Okay.
think it was about '79, somewhere along in there.
Didn't
that
our
that
kids
building
all
opened.
go north of 60?
Everybody went north
There
of
were
60.
no
There was
schools
nobody
south
south of
of
60.
Okay.
Right.
There was none of the, Aspen,
Right.
South,
No.
South
Okay,
Campus
everything
at
was
all.
on the other side.
Right.
In fact,
So when they
that's
were,
all been built since Cuneo.
oh, definitely. I
'Cause
was
I
on that
remember-
long-range planning committee when we
Right.
ended up buying that land because we were looking all over. If we needed land.
Yeah.
Couldn't go up because at that
Well,
time the
was
state
that
prohibited
any
you from
of
going up.
Clavy's land?
That was Clavy's.
Yeah.
Yes, that was Clavy land.
Yeah, Clavy obviously also is where now you have, the Aspen Point townhomes, and you have the shopping center with Walgreens, and, obviously B-Dubs is there and such,
Yeah,
but
all of those.
that was all
Sullivan
Clavy's
Center and all of
property,
that. Right.
So, and so most of these things, it was like pieces that were farms at one point, right?
Oh,
They're
I
all
think this
farms.
was all
The
farms
whole thing
out
was
here.
farms.
Yeah, it
Mill
had to be.
60, remember Mill 60? At the corner of 60 and 21, the southwest corner? There was a big, huge billboard sign, I mean, huge,
Yeah.
that said Mill 60, and everybody, coming soon, and everybody thought, what is Mill 60? It's across from the mall, what is it gonna be here?
Yeah.
It was wooded, we thought the whole piece of land was wooded, and come find out it was just a small strip of woods
Oh.
along 60 in Milwaukee, and there was a big farm back in there.
Yeah.
And it's
Oh.
now the Continental Executive Park.
Oh
Yeah.
my, oh my.
I remember going to meetings with the guys from Prentice Copley, and they had, I think it was a barn they
It was the
converted.
barn, yes.
And you go into meetings to discuss,
smell.
it smelled kind of like
barn.
somewhat odoriferous, and it kind of like, well, let's get this meeting moving and let's get out of here.
Yeah, really.
But that was real close to 21, I think.
Yeah, it was,
Yeah.
because the house was there, but the house wasn't worth renovating.
Right.
So the barn is structurally sound, we'll put our corporate off. Larry Lashton's daughter worked for them, she was a secretary, and she goes, it was horrible, there was days she didn't want to go to work because it was
Yeah.
so bad.
Or if we're going to stay on things that smelled, how about Cuneo's Chicken Farm?
Oh, Lord.
They had a chicken farm?
Oh,
up
yeah,
Oh, yes.
they had a big chicken farm. What was it, right across from Public Works?
It was
And-
north of Public Works.
Yeah.
It was approximately where that little shopping center is before you get to Ellenson Road.
there?
Okay.
like
It was
with
at the
kids and
beginning of
those
that
places?
on
Yeah.
the east side of the street.
It was a chicken farm.
Oh,
Oh,
big
yeah.
chicken farm.
Yeah.
And everybody around here, everybody griped about the smell, but everybody went and bought their eggs there. They were
Oh,
all
okay.
fresh eggs.
Yeah, if you
and
get
all
the
that.
right,
right wind.
weather and humidity in the summer, it would waft over the whole town.
Oh,
It was like,
yes,
oh my
yes.
God.
Well, didn't I hear too, we had buffalo roaming around too, or was that?
Well, we had
was that a
albino
lore?
deer. That was
Oh.
That was
at,
the Cuneos,
that was
right?
Cuneo's albino deer herd.
The buffalo was Lester's.
Lester had
Okay, there
buffalo.
were buffalo.
Cuneo also has buffalo,
Yes.
but they're out at his,
Fairfield Road.
farm and estate
Yeah.
off of Chardon. I think
Yeah,
it's
Chardon out by west of
Yeah,
Fairfield.
he's got a
out that
pretty
way,
big
yeah.
herd, but
Yeah.
I think he's still got the albino deer out there. He moved them out there once,
Yeah, they
When
just
they
roamed up
overtook
to
once,
Milwaukee.
once
yeah.
Craig
It's
Landing
like, wow.
got developed. But
Right.
Yeah.
yeah, that was a sight to see. That's why the golf course is called White Deer Run.
Yep.
It is?
Yep.
Yes, because in a more lucid moment, myself and Trustee Henley,
Henley at the
with,
time, right.
Ed Zale's son-in-law at the time, we settled. We were going to call it the Moors, and we go, "This is sufficiently depressing as a
Oh, no, you don't want the
name
Moors.
for the golf course." And we even went to the extent of designing the flags and the actual branding labels and such. And then we said, no, this isn't going to work. So I said, well, they got the deer herd. So
White Deer Run.
I said, what about White Deer Run? Because I had just played, I think, Black Wolf Run up in
Okay.
Kohler. And
Oh,
I just said, well,
yes.
it's a run, anyway. So that's why it's named that. So.
Well, so that's what we can thank you for that, because
Yeah,
it sounds
yes.
better, the Moors does sound a little
That was a little
depressing, so,
strange.
yeah.
Of course, our Hawthorne Melody Farms used to be along Milwaukee, on the other side of the
Sure.
railroad
Right.
track.
So-
You had the white deer running over here, and on the other side there was
Well,
Melody Farms.
how long ago has that been? Do you remember going there or anything about
Not
that?
as a
you know-
farm, not as a farm. It was already starting to cave in
Oh,
on one
yeah,
end when
yeah,
I
yeah.
moved out in
Okay.
'77.
It wasn't open when
Right.
we moved in.
No, no.
Okay.
But I never went to it as
Yeah.
a kid. It was like I mean, I grew up way on the south side.
Or would
and,
it be like traveling to a whole nother?
Yeah, it would be
They
like
had
going
the
on
big
vacation.
farmhouses
You know?
were still around there where the workers from Cuneo lived.
Yeah.
A lot of them lived on there.
Well, because let's talk about Cuneo a little more and the Greg's Landing subdivision. Because when did all that start? I mean, that was in discussion for
Oh,
a
goodness.
long time.
We started dealing with Cuneo when I was a trustee.
And
So that was
would-
prior to '89, because I was
Okay.
trustee in
You
'81 to '89.
When did you annex in the southeast corner, which is River Tree?
Oh, goodness.
That was back
was that Cuneo land as well?
yeah.
All of that,
Yeah.
the whole thing, the mall.
Cuneo's
the whole thing.
land runs
Okay.
all the way from 60 south on the east side of the street, all the way down to where the senior housing is.
Right, right.
Okay.
It runs all the way down there. It was about
All of that was
140
Cuneo.
acres.
Oh.
And then across the street, of course, we got the
Right.
infamous 55 acres. that
Yes.
You can,
That
you can
corner.
own it if you want it for $1 million bucks in
Okay,
the pot an
that's
acre.
that's
That's
that
that
empty
southeast corner.
Yeah,
corner.
northeast corner.
Yeah,
Northeast
so
corner,
and that's
right.
still Cuneo's,
Yes.
and
yes,
that's a lot of money.
yes.
Oh,
Okay.
big time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I always envisioned and always wanted, and everybody used to laugh about it. It says Barbara's high-end motel.
Well, you know,
Yeah, well,
people
really,
Well, I
you know.
but I
about that,
wanted to
yeah.
go there. We
Yeah.
needed
But
a
you're right,
banquet
Barb.
hall and a big facility.
And it's still included in the annexation
Yes, it
agreement because
is.
they had allowed for the I don't know, like a 10-story building or
10-story
something.
building, I think
you
it
know.
is.
So
That's
there's so it's
right.
the hope,
It's still on
hope
the books,
alive,
right.
Yeah,
But people have
I mean,
to have
the
enough.
annexation agreement's dead now. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
Because it was only for 20 years, and we annexed it in '88,
Yep.
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
and that was after Libertyville decided to reject it, and then we,
For the third time.
yeah.
Well, let's talk about. I know between Libertyville, Vernon Hills. If you've been here a while, there's some tension there. Good-natured as it can be, but there were issues there back when the mall was getting ready to come in. Correct? Was that before you guys'
Yeah, well, that was
time, or-
before me,
That was,
and,
yeah,
yeah.
that was, wasn't here for that, because mall was already built when I got here, but I did hear the stories that yes, it was always a contention.
Because that could have
Now,
been
that
that
whole
was
Libertyville.
that
development,
Cuneo's land?
All of that was Cuneo's land.
But,
That
okay,
whole thing was.
who was Klutznick?
I don't remember.
There's a name
I heard
blast
that
from the
name, but I
past, too.
think that goes back. I think he was more on the other side, north of the Cuneo corner,
Okay.
back in there.
And then what about
Hollister.
the convent that actually existed?
Where's there a convent?
It used to be, I think it was right at somewhere around 60 and Route 21.
There was supposed to have been a convent.
Many
along
moons
in there
ago.
someplace. I think it was
Really?
part of the old Mill 60 development.
Yeah.
Because I remember
I
them
thought-
talking
yeah.
about the nuns out there with the farm equipment
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
over in that corner.
Well, and I know
so-
people would talk about, there was a gentleman that came on several years ago and said when he was young, he worked at a huge farm that had this most beautiful home on it.
That was
That
it.
it was more beautiful than anything
Ooh.
anybody's ever seen.
Red
in-
Top Farms, maybe. It might have been that one.
Might have been.
That's in
So, but all
Libertyville,
these
but
people had these
that was
stories of
this
these
huge horse farm up
beautiful
there. Yeah.
mansions
Yeah.
and the grounds, and it was just a whole nother lifestyle. It definitely wasn't like suburban Vernon Hills. It was very high
very
end,
nice.
where all the people would show up here to
Right.
get away from the heat of the city.
Well,
So-
like the Cuneo Mansion. I was there when Mrs. Cuneo still lived there. I'm sure you probably
Yeah,
were too. I don't
yeah, it would
remember.
probably been in the early 90s.
But when it turned over and became a museum, when you go in there, it was quite a realization for me, and people didn't realize it. That home was the same way when she lived there. These were their personal belongings. And
Yeah.
it's just hard to believe it because
Yeah.
it's such a beautiful mansion.
Well,
but
like you said,
those were
she was there till like maybe
Oh, goodness.
1990.
She was in
even.
the 90s when she
Yeah,
passed.
I think she passed away 91 or
Something
so.
like
because
that,
then
right.
then they went for, a non-for-profit
Right.
status.
Right.
Because there was hearings, I believe they
went
even
through
wound up down in Springfield on it.
I think it did.
You
I
know,
think it did too.
and the infamous Bill Meyer, their attorney.
Oh my goodness, when we were
yeah.
meeting with Cuneo, we used to have 2-on-2 meetings back in those days, and it was invariably Phil Ellis, the mayor. And we'd meet with Mr. Cuneo and Bill Myers, the attorney, and we'd be down at the Forge Club. At that time, it was
Okay.
quite a private, high-end place that you would go. And we would go out and talk so they could talk to Mr. Cuneo because Bill Meyer was going, no, legally we got to do this. We got to do this
So
way.
you get him off to the side.
Yeah,
and
we'd
talk to
go,
him?
come
Yeah.
on, Bill, let's go take a walk. So we could, and then he'd come back and do the legal stuff. But he would just, it was great.
Oh, interesting.
It was quite a
Yeah,
quite
there
a
was,
time.
there was a lot of time and effort put into on that one with workshops,
Yes.
workshops and more workshops. And that was during the annexation, but even beyond that, once they started to want to do the build out
Oh,
of the
goodness.
land, it was like
Yeah.
you lost track of how many meetings we
Exactly.
actually went to on
Really
that,
did.
just to get
And it
done.
wasn't just with the developers. You guys were doing most of it because I left at that time because my husband got ill, and
Right.
I just decided to spend some time with you. But you were meeting with the developers, you're meeting with the county, you're meeting
Oh,
with
yeah.
the state,
Yeah.
you're doing all of this stuff that only before you'd gotten down to the nitty gritty of it was just kind of in passing. You'd have a quick little meeting over here,
Yeah.
or a telephone call there,
I
or
mean,
something.
there was, because, let's face it, that piece of land was north of the tracks is just shy of 1,000
Oh, it's
acres,
huge.
where the homes and now our retail development is
Right.
along Milwaukee. And then there was another about 200 acres plus that is where you have the townhomes south of the J&E Railroad tracks, and then Amley's apartment complex.
Right.
And, so it came out to like 1,200 homes. I mean, 1,200 acres.
Acres,
You know,
yeah,
so
right, right.
that was without a doubt, I'm sure, the biggest annexation we ever did, we ever have done, ever will do.
Oh,
you know.
definitely.
Well,
'cause
and I think
even
people
the
need
rest
to
of us-
know too, because the village does Vernon Hills takes a very hands-on approach on everything. And things
Yeah.
don't
We always
just
have,
happen
yes.
willy-nilly.
No.
Never have.
No.
Even back in the Deer Path days,
Right.
there's a history of planning, making sure it's done so that the schools get their money
Yep.
and everybody
Right,
gets their
right,
money
yep,
out of it,
right.
which is kind of not the way that all villages have always run. You
No,
just have a history
yeah,
of that.
we've had the Naperville ordinance in place for years
Forever,
and
it
years. In
seems like,
fact,
right. That's
when
what
we
it's
were
called.
What's the
talking
neighborhood? What does
earlier-
that mean?
Ours was modeled on after
Okay,
the
so
neighborhood.
we're trying
It's
to-
it's specifically tied into how many bedrooms a single, any
Okay.
type of residence
how much
generates.
revenue is generated out of it
Yeah,
for the
we
districts.
should probably revisit that, now that, there's some
probably
newer
should.
housing projects coming to town that will probably affect District 103, but they're on a much smaller scale.
Those
Yeah.
are down to the south end of town.
Yeah,
That's
and
what we're
along
talking about.
45,
Right.
you know.
Well,
103
and we're talking about doing
73,
these
right.
things. The name that always had come up before was Geo. That
Oh.
Adeline
Adeline
Geocaris
Geocaris
would
was the
jump in
attorney.
there as the village attorney and make sure everybody did it the way
Right.
it needed to be done. And she was kind of groundbreaking just to have a woman attorney that was,
Yeah, well, she-
wielding
Especially
that-
one of her stature. Geo was quite a legalese, if you will, and she was quite an advisor.
Would she go
for
back
us.
to the 60s here?
Oh,
Or did she
goodness,
go-
yes. She goes back, I believe she was, I know she was, because they used to meet, the village meetings, they didn't have a hall. They met in one of the hotel rooms of Hawthorne Club. Outside of the building here across the street
Oh,
was
like
a motel.
because it was Tally Ho.
It was Tally Ho, and they would meet over there
Yeah.
at a hotel room. That's where they
Right.
had their meetings. And then they got the trailer and put it over on Oakwood Road. There was a
Okay.
double wide trailer went in there, and they thought they were the cat's meow at that
Okay.
time.
And then at some point, then they took Tally Ho over then and used
Right.
the
Well,
clubhouse.
that
Right.
you weren't on the board then.
No,
And
no.
we were only in
I was
town
he-
2 years.
right.
That was 1979.
Right, was
So the
79.
board that was in place then,
Was-
and Mayor Sullivan, right?
John Sullivan was the mayor.
And
Phil
that
Ellis
was a
was
good
on the
move
board. Yeah,
because
yeah.
I don't think they spent over $500,000
No.
for the whole site,
Right.
which includes now the Lashin Center, Village Hall. We used to have a swimming pool behind
Yes.
Village Hall, and then the parking lot, and then the whole 9-hole golf
Golf
course.
course.
And that they spent how much? You
About a
think, Bob?
half
About a
of
half.
$500,000.
Yeah.
Really?
for the
Can
whole
you
thing.
imagine what it would be now?
Oh, we know.
Yeah.
All
was-
Hawthorne
yeah.
Club was in there, that whole piece, so, we brought it all in at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Hawthorne Club. Yeah, Hawthorne Club was
Yeah.
in town. I mean, but we didn't own it. But
No.
yeah, for $500,000. Yeah, when you think of it, put lots. Some lots were going for $500,000 over in Greg's Landing.
Oh,
at one time.
definitely,
I don't know if
definitely,
anything's crept back up, but there was a time before the Great
Yeah.
Recession,
Yeah,
$500,000 for a lot. I go, whoa.
Yeah, well, and think about when you talk about that development and keeping track of it and watching out for everybody. Another place I think about is the Nike site. Well, that's what we call it, the Nike site.
Right.
Right.
It's the Vernon Hills Athletic Complex. But
Right.
if you've just come to town lately, you know, and you see the big Vortac thing, and you think that's a little odd, and you see the sports fields, but you don't think about what went into making
What was
sure
there
that's
to
what it
do.
Yeah,
was.
that was a
Yeah.
time-consuming process.
Oh, goodness, we
and,
started that when the first time I met with
Well-
them was, I was a trustee. And then I was mayor and was still meeting with the Navy.
And it was with the Navy you had
With
to
the
talk to,
Navy
because
you
it
had
was
to deal
still
with.
Navy
But
ground.
actually,
It
the
was
actual
93.
getting it was Roger and that board really
Well,
brought it,
and
finally
that
got
was-
it in.
Clinton was president at the
Right.
time. And I want to say it was late 92 or 90, it had to be 93.
Yeah, it was
He
just
declared
the-
it access land under the BRAC Act.
Okay.
And then
I think it was just before I went off the board that happened.
yeah, it was,
And so it was, yeah.
93, somewhere
Early-
there.
early 93.
There were
Like
22
92,
different taxing bodies that sat down at the table originally.
Yes.
You know, that had an opportunity to potentially lay claim
yeah.
to land there.
22, like what are you talking
You
about?
name everybody.
Like schools and
Everybody.
townships and,
Everybody
Libraries,
in the,
fire
the county
protection
wanted
districts.
something.
Okay.
It was like, you know, it was,
Yeah.
you couldn't help but chuckle when we first sat down. And then we obviously, you know, persevered
Right.
and continued and continued. And as a result, we got, yeah, obviously 50 acres. The high school
Yeah.
got about 50. Stevenson got 50. District 103 got
Yeah.
13 out of 163 acres, you
But the
know.
first time I sat down with them when I was mayor was, at that time was Larry Lashin was the village manager.
Oh, yeah.
He knew that the Navy was going to be out touring it. And some way or another, he managed to get a meeting set up that they came to the village hall, which is now the Lashin Center.
Yeah.
And I met him in the conference room.
Oh, yeah.
And like Roger said, it just kept evolving and more people
Well,
were
you
getting
had the
involved. It was
Department
like,
of the
wow.
Interior, you had the Department of Defense.
Everybody was there.
You had, obviously, you had the Army, you had
Yep.
the Navy. You, yeah, and the Department of the Interior was regarding the parks, you know, the
Yes.
parks and such. And then the Department of Education. It
Yes.
was like,
oh my
it was
word.
pretty crazy.
Well, and it was not a sure thing that this was going to be open
No.
recreation land. We could have gone like Glenview and turned it into
No,
more
no,
homes,
well,
right?
Well, that
Lynn,
was
not,
part
not
of our
to,
development,
not to
part of our
correct you, but,
negotiations
yeah, we
with
were just going to use it for a public conveyance.
Yeah.
We
So
wanted
you didn't have to
it
go
f-
through that
We
then.
wanted
But
it
that was
for
part
the
of the battle,
schools.
was convincing them that we wanted it.
Yeah.
As I
Okay.
recall, that Roger was quite instrumental in doing that. You
Well,
really
what was
were.
interesting was, and there was caveats involved, and that's why you had to develop it too. You couldn't just let it lay fallow.
No.
There was a potential risk if you just let it lay fallow, it would revert back to the government.
Okay.
So, yeah, it was a fun process, but again, it was, you know.
Well, and then through the process, that, you know, the gift that kept on giving, because it looked like it was, from the outside, it looked like brambles and things. You know, people who'd been here a while, I would hear stories,
right.
yeah, their kids would go have social engagements in
Oh,
the
they would.
bunkers and things
Or
like that.
The littler kids would go over and they come back with bullets.
Yeah,
Where'd you
because-
get those?
Well, 'cause
Because
it-
Chicago used to use one of the landing strips for a firing range.
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
well, Barb, I think a lot of police departments did.
They did,
They had a
but I know
big
Chicago
earthen
did it
berm
too.
that they
Oh, they
would,
just shoot stuff in
they'd
there?
pump lead into it pretty heavily.
Well, and I heard somebody say that they remember even helicopters doing like
Oh, yeah.
touchdowns
Oh, they
and
did it
stuff,
all
and
the
it was
time. It
and
was
it was a- you know,
constant.
they were used
Yep.
to it, where it would have kind of
Yep.
freaked us out
I
today.
think those
so.
were Hueys.
They
They were
were.
coming
They
from
were
Glenview Naval Air
Glenview Naval.
Station.
They would do
and, you know,
touchdowns, or sometimes they would
Yeah.
land and do maneuvers.
Yeah,
or
you'd hear
whatever
a
over there.
distinctive thump, thump, thump.
Yeah,
you
they
know.
said
No
it was.
doubt
They
about
said it
what
was
it
something to
was.
hear,
Yeah,
so
Yeah.
something
it
to see
was.
kind of in the night too.
Right.
So you'd see
Yeah.
that. So I mean, and then you had to, you know, go through and get some of the big concrete underground bunkers. That's where the Nike missiles actually
Yeah,
were.
yeah.
I mean, we don't have any Nike missiles there now.
No.
No,
No.
we'd like to get one just for
A disarmed one, of course.
Yes, for display purposes, and I think we will one day.
Well,
Someday,
and
I
let's
hope
talk
to.
about the name, because early on you're going to call it the Nike site to give homage to the Nike missiles, but
But it got
Nike Athletic
twisted and
Company had
became
nothing
the
with
Nike
it.
Athletic got involved in
Yeah,
it.
the shoe people took
Right.
Took
issue with it.
offense, huh? Yeah.
I still think I would have fought it, honestly, because to me, it'll always be the Nike site.
Well,
I
yeah,
still
I
say
s-
it without realizing it, and people will look at me like, what? The
Well,
where?
and what about the big vortex that's in the middle right now? I've heard that. Have you heard anything lately that perhaps because of them using now GPS for the airplanes, they might not need that big
You
thing
know what?
anymore?
It's
think
a
it'll
certain
be there for a while.
redundancy.
Yeah.
You know, but that process again, we involved Congressman Porter at the time.
Right.
Then it was turned over to Congressman Kirk at the time, and you know, in fact, the monies came from, I want to say it was probably Porter, to actually elevate it so that we could build the high school.
Right.
Not only the high school, but put up all the lights.
It used to be
Oh, for
lower
the
to the
stadium.
ground,
Yeah.
so we had to raise
Yeah,
it.
it had to be
So it
raised.
has to be higher than
It has
what
to be
all
higher
this-
than the buildings
okay.
within so many
That's why
feet.
the
Right.
disc it sits on now is called a counterpoise, and
Right.
now the radio waves bounce off of that up into the air,
Right.
and the reason it was on the ground before, that was the highest location I think in town.
In town,
Okay.
right.
So then you
Yeah.
just raised it up so you could
Yeah,
keep
but-
doing what you needed
Right.
to do.
So we could build the high school
Yeah.
and the recreational facilities.
Let's talk
Right.
about that high school process. I
Yeah.
mean, because when I moved here,
well-
there was no Vernon Hills High School. I
No.
don't think people were even talking about it.
Well, our
in
kids went
95.
to, well, yours
Well-
went to Carmel, but mine went to
Well,
Libertyville High School.
now I got to give Larry Lashin credit for
Yes.
this. Larry Lashin, I think, pulled me aside when I became mayor, and he said, and we set up a strategic plan with, you
Right,
know,
right.
all these community institutions we didn't have, and there was about 10 of them. And he said, listen, he said, in all honesty, the best thing you guys could do is somehow bring a high school to Vernon Hills. And I said, okay, and so did the rest of
Went
the
out from
board
there,
at the
right.
time.
Yeah,
and
this was
we
one
went
of the things we
through-
talked about.
It was 5 referendums
Yeah.
before
Before
the
we got
fifth
it.
one was passed, because, you know,
Yeah.
some of the folks on the school board, which was dominated by people from Libertyville,
Mm-hmm.
wanted to expand at Butler Lake. They couldn't because they were landlocked there.
Mm-hmm.
Then they wanted to go on the 80 acres.
I wanted to go over there.
off
and
of
everybody said
Butterfield
no,
Road.
They wanted traveling there.
Butterfield Road and Golf, which
Oh,
is
that one,
quote
yes,
unquote
yes.
the open space district land.
What
It's
is
on
that?
the west side
is
of
that
Butterfield.
Canterbury or
Canterbury subdivision.
Yeah,
was
you
gonna be a
enter
school.
across
Yeah,
the
they
backside.
would have, then that would have been like Stevenson U2, sorry, folks. And in essence, we were lucky enough to have, you know, was working
Right.
simultaneously to bring the Nike site in.
Okay.
So there was a lot of,
kind of
there was a lot of meetings
Yeah.
involved in that one too.
So that because when Nike came in, you could find the space then. You could find the room for the high school here then. and
Oh,
put
yeah,
that out there.
definitely.
Oh, definitely.
But
Well,
it
we-
was a
we-
long.
It
that was-
wasn't just
was
that
a-
the districts got, you know, all these
Yeah.
districts got land, but the village got X amount of land along
Well,
with it.
in
and We're
addition
able to carve out a little bit bigger spaces and whatever.
And we were able to talk to the school board at the time, even before we annexed in all the Nike site property, to buy 20 acres
Yes.
from, I think it was called the Corporation of the West, which was, owned the land,
Okay.
okay?
The
where-
actual
Where the
deed holders.
buildings are, all right?
Okay.
So that 20 acres, it was pretty reasonable too. I think it was like maybe 300,000 an acre at the
Yeah, it
time.
wasn't
And it was, you know, so they got
Mm-hmm.
the 20 acres there, and then bang, we hit them with the other 50, you know,
For the
yeah,
fields and the
once it was
stadium.
transferred,
Yeah.
you know, so it's a beautiful campus now, and it's, you know, it has about 75 acres, which is
Right.
a great
Yeah.
size.
Yeah.
you
Well,
know.
well, think about,
It's nice.
we've talked about the Hawthorne School's expanding. We've talked about bringing a high school. We've talked about the Nike site,
Yeah,
um,
cool.
library,
The library.
Oh, library was great too.
Post office.
Yeah.
train station.
Yeah. Oh, that's another thing that went back to days
Oh,
way
yeah.
back when. I
That
remember-
land you guys got,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
What
so
was
you
it,
had it,
back
you
in-
had it before the train actually would
Oh,
ever stop
yeah.
there?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
yeah, it was
Well,
there a
I
long
used
time.
to, Joanne, I'm sorry, I can't remember her last name. She was mayor of Libertyville and
Joanne Ekman.
Ekman, thank
Yeah.
you, and Marilyn Sindels and I and a bunch of other politicians from the area. We all had to go down Chicago and catch a train once for the Metro. We were trying to get Metro to put in the station, the
Yeah.
line. So they set aside cars and we all got down there and got on the train. We rode it all the way up by Box Lake or some weird place or another. And they put us on the sideline and had lunch. I said they were holding us captivity and we weren't sure what they were on it.
Yeah.
But that was our first meetings with Metro. and
So that was in
many
the
years ago.
70s then?
No, that was in the late 80s.
80s, okay.
Late 80s.
I mean, so these
And
things
it
take time.
takes
Oh, yeah,
forever
it'll take- yeah.
to get this stuff going.
Well, it's like
that
this-
wasn't our first phone calls. That was our first sit-down meeting.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get around to that, probably 5 years have gone by, you know,
Yeah.
trying to get something done.
Well, and
it
then
doesn't happen
you
overnight.
talk about, you know,
Right.
lengths of time. I mean, all of them were in the 10-year mark.
Oh,
I mean, all these
absolutely.
institutions, except for a couple. But then the senior housing, which is known as
That's
Victory
another one,
Center,
right?
that was
goodness, that took
identified in
forever.
1993
Right.
in our strategic plan.
Right.
You know, with myself and
Takes
whoever's on the
forever.
board. And it, what did that open in the last 5 years?
Yep.
You know, so I, you know,
Well, that's like the overall development. I truly believe that Larry Lashen was one of the biggest contributors to what we have in
Yeah,
town now.
yeah.
One of my favorite stories was Larry coming back after he met with Ms. Rainey for the Rainey property down 45.
And Rainey being like
And he comes
Centennial
back, he
Crossing.
called me on the phone, and he says, "Can you meet me at Village Hall?" And I went, "Sure." So I got in the car and came over here, and I'm sitting in his office, and I happened to see he was real tall, and he was sitting sideways with his feet out, and I could see him sticking out from his desk, and I go, "You got mud all over you," and he goes, "Well, that's because I fell off the back of the tractor." Miss Rainey decided to take him on a tour,
Oh,
and he had a
it's-
suit and dress shoes on, and he's riding in the back of the tractor and slid off into the mud.
So, and that became, is that Centennial or is that?
Yes,
That's
Centennial
Centennial
Crossing,
Crossing,
yes,
yes,
yes.
yes.
Well, and the reason, here's another thing, the reason some of our school districts are a little odd, you know, they kind of jig in and they jig out, and I've heard
They
they
were
cut
formed
through
when
a
there was
house.
nobody here.
Yeah, they were before there were houses here,
Right.
because that was how that farm,
Yeah.
this parcel goes with that house over there. Is that the truth? or
Well,
am
yeah, I
making
mean,
that up?
you know, I mean, so many of the boundaries were, you know, drawn 100+ years
I
ago.
was going to say they
Okay.
were drawn
Yeah.
before there were any houses. I mean,
It-
you've heard of it, and it actually did. There, I think this has been changed now, but there used to be a house in Deer Path
Yeah.
that
I think
the
it is.
student's bedroom was in Stevenson, and the rest of the house was
Oh.
Libertyville.
Yeah.
And if you look at the line, it cuts right down. It's a straight line.
It's a straight line, but the
and
houses
the
curve
road,
around. Yeah.
you know, wiggles in and out, so it's kind
Well,
of strange.
I remember when the folks over in Grosse Pointe Village that had their children going to Hawthorne wanted their children, that same neighborhood, to send their children to, you know, Vernon Hills High School.
Right.
And so they petitioned the
Yeah.
regional superintendent of schools to move the boundary out of Mundelein High School District, and it didn't happen.
No,
Yeah,
it
they
didn't
just
happen.
do not, they,
No,
that
it
is
just-
tough.
District
it
70
didn't
wanted to
happen,
do that with
so-
73,
Yeah.
and 73 said, well, if you do, you got to take the bond indebtedness with you.
Yeah.
And they decided not to do that.
I tell you, well, it just tells you, you know, to get anything done, and then to do it right, and to do it with
I think we
forethought
did
takes a
do
lot
that.
of people and a
You
lot
know
of
what,
time.
though, Barb, I think we did do that with Greg's Landing.
We did with Greg's Landing.
We
yes,
got
but this
that
was
all
years
put
before
it,
that,
you know, it was
right,
negotiated,
Okay.
and
Right.
that was
Before
all-
the houses were even there,
Yes.
before
Oh,
the
yes.
bodies were there,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
But that, yeah, a lot of that would have been 70, and then, well, still high school district 128, but since the choice zones.
I know.
All the
That's
choice
That's a
zones.
whole nother show. We
Oh,
got-
I know,
Yes,
that's,
that's another whole story.
yeah, that's for sure.
Well, and as we back up, there's been people putting in time all the way through. You had mentioned Joanne Christanzi, and the
Joanne
fact that
Christanzi,
before we had
the
police,
ex-village.
it was like, what did she do? She'd turn on her
She would
porch
turn
light?
on her light. There was one police officer in one car. Well, it was before he had the car, I think. Because in order for them to get calls, Joanne would take them at home, and she'd put her outside light on. And if he was out in the car and he'd see it, he'd stop. Otherwise, every once in a while, he'd get up and look out his kitchen window down the street because she lived
See
4
if everything
houses
was
down.
okay.
And if her porch light was on, he knew he had a police call,
There
so
was
he'd
something
jump in the
going on.
car and take off.
Well, and Jim Heyer had told me too, we didn't have snowplows here, so
Oh, no.
Ernie lived in Deer Path, Ernie from Ernie's.
Yeah, sure,
and
sure.
he
Ernie
would-
Foley.
And he would just take his big truck and go back and forth a few
Right,
times and just try to
right.
get the snow out of the way for
Get the
everybody.
snower to
so.
dig ruts for us to drive in.
And I guess,
Yeah,
I think to
yeah.
bring back all that history, people have put in a heck of a lot of time and heart into this community.
yes.
Because you guys, to do the job you do, it isn't, you've had to sit in meetings that none of the rest of us are ever going to know about.
Right,
You
right.
have, you know, been, I won't call it twisting arms, but you've
some
been,
of that.
you've had
Not
a
a
very
lot, but
strong
some.
presence with a lot of people over a lot of time to make things happen.
Yeah.
And as do all of the trustees and all the people who serve as volunteers, so.
Well, I think all of us at least everybody that I've known over the years, we were quite fortunate in the people that were on the board or was running for the board or ended up ultimately being elected to the board, that we didn't do it for us. We did it for our community. We
Right.
really have a heartfelt desire to see our town, number one, developed what we thought was the right way, and now to keep it that way. We
Yeah.
spent a lot of time
Well, let's
and
put it this
energy
way,
on it.
none of us, you know, we work for the people, obviously.
Exactly.
We're not in a pension plan, we're
No.
not into group health. And, and on top of that, I can honestly say there's any relative or friend working for this village that are
Exactly.
related to myself or the
Or me,
trustees.
right.
And that's a good thing. You know what I
good thing.
mean? Where we've maintained our objectivity and professionalism, and you know we
Yes.
trust our staff to make personnel decisions. You know, not that we can't get pulled in for department head changeover, but as far as the rank and file, we just do it on an equal opportunity
Yeah.
basis and get the best person.
Yeah,
So,
we've got
And
a
we
good
have.
system.
so that's
Yeah,
a
I'm
good
very, very
thing.
proud of our
It's very,
staff.
but yeah, that's very.
We worked hard to get our
Yeah.
staff.
Before we close, I want to ask, is there anything you'd like to see happen? Like, you know, is there any dream you've got?
I still want my upgrade hotel.
you want
Banquet rooms.
you want a banquet room and a nice hotel
I
over
want
on
a
Yeah,
that
that
nice
would
corner
be
by the
nice.
mall,
That
right?
would be
Nice
nice.
place.
That would be nice to be able to bring people
When
in
we
for
used
big
to have
conventions and
Christmas
conferences.
dinners years ago, we'd have
Oh, yeah.
it was this employee appreciation night back in those days. We always had to go out of town. There's no place
Did
to
we
do
ever
it in
have one
town.
in town? I mean, we stopped
No,
because of
we
the,
never had one in
you know,
town.
with the recession. But
There was
I
no
guess we
place to have-
technically we could do it now at White
Now
Deer
we
Run.
probably could,
You could
but
do
back
it.
in the day, no, I don't think we ever had
No, we
one.
never had it in
So
town.
that's your
Yeah.
wish list. Okay, we'll get you a
Yes.
big,
I think
beautiful
that's the
hotel
one
and-
thing that we are lacking in town is a big place for.
Well-
the only well, you can also do Cuneo now, you know, or at that time, you know,
yeah.
there's.
Well, in
the
I guess
mansion.
the other one though that
but they didn't have that in the day.
we most recently identified again when we did our couple years ago the strategic plan update was just to bring more senior housing into
That
town.
More,
definitely,
okay.
I agree with that
And-
because we're
and-
all getting older.
Yeah. Now,
And you want to
I-
stay here, right?
I do want to stay
Yeah,
here.
we got
I
a
do wanna
prejudice
stay
now.
here.
We're all old.
Yeah,
you
right.
know.
But I just recently retired, and somebody said, "Well, are you going to sell your house and move down with your daughter?" My daughter lives in Naperville, and I went, "No, this is my home. I'm
Right,
staying
right, right,
here.
right, right.
This is where I belong."
So we would like to accommodate people that want to get out of their houses
Right.
and get into, you
So
know.
they can
yeah,
stay here.
Yeah. yeah.
Well, that was the whole thing. Even Hawthorne Club, at the time when we built Hawthorne Club, or we built Stone Fence Farms, there was no place for the people that wanted to grow
Move up,
bigger or
yeah.
have bigger families to go. So we ended up with Stone Fence and then ultimately Hawthorne Club, and now
Yeah.
we've got the
Greg's Landing.
Greg's Landing
yeah.
up there,
Yeah.
and other developments in town. I mean,
Yeah,
Centennial
we have a
Plaza is nice size,
diversification
but-
of housing.
we have a
you
great-
could get a place for $100,000.
Or you can
you know,
go
a
a
condo,
million, yeah.
converted apartment, what have
Three-quarters,
you,
yeah.
up to a house that's probably several $1 million.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
And there's a few of those up in
Yeah.
Greg's Landing.
Yeah, well, and it looks like the economy is going to cooperate for us, and we're going to keep going strong.
I think
and-
we
and-
are.
And thank you all for what you do for our village, and the stuff you do behind the scenes with all these meetings and all the getting together and making things happen. And so we appreciate that, and I would encourage you, if anybody ever wants to know more about what's going on in the village, talk to these guys. Talk to
me anytime.
talk to anybody, or talk to staff here at
Right.
Vernon, at the Village Hall here at Vernon
Yeah,
Hills.
plus, obviously, we've been broadcasting our meetings since '93 now.
Right.
Yeah, we were one of the
Right.
first to do that.
I
Yes,
think
he
so.
was.
Yeah,
We were talking about it when I went off,
Yeah.
and then we started it in '93.
yeah,
and I was
over
off
in
for-
the old Village Hall,
Right.
which is the Lashin Center, where the Park District is now, so.
Well, that's the
Right.
other good part. You know, you can watch Park District meetings, you can watch school board
Yes,
meetings. Mike
absolutely.
Stordo of our cable
Sure.
station over here makes sure that you can see what's going on
Great.
in town. So that's the key. People
And
have
you're
to
doing
get
a
in.
great job of all of the recreational stuff, too.
Well, and hopefully everybody
Appreciate
can
that.
just stay aware and because this is your town. You got
There
to
is
stay
one thing I wanted
stay
to
locked
touch on,
in.
I just thought of it, was summer celebration.
Okay.
The first time we did a summer celebration, It was Ernie's flatbed trailer, and one of the police officers were giving square dance lessons on that. We had a pie eating contest, but not very much
Okay.
involved. And that, it just kind of evolved from year to year. And I remember the first time we had any quote unquote big money, had it under a flyer tent, and I was sitting at the table, and all of a sudden somebody said, "We got a lot of money here." So I looked down in the money box and I went, "Oh my goodness." So they put it in a paper bag and I sat on it. I wouldn't get out of the chair until we could flag down a police officer to come by, and we'd just send the money to the police station.
That's when you knew it got to be a
We
big,
knew it
because
was
you knew the
going
paper
then,
bag got
right?
a
It
little
was
too big for
going.
Barbara.
Well, along those lines, remember we put the big tent out there? It
Oh,
had
yes.
the bands in it. It was funny. It was like,
Oh, it
and
was
it
funny.
wasn't a tent like the big beer tent. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
where they have
No,
the
no, it wasn't that
DJs and
big.
such.
It was just a
It was
tent.
like, it was a decent sized tent. I don't know if
Pretty
it
good
was it
size.
from the
It was the old
from the picnic committee.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, and it was
Yes.
like, I think we had like the what were a couple of the old rock bands, like the Shadows of Night,
Oh,
or,
yeah, it was
or
funny.
somebody like that playing in the tent.
We always had the drop busting every year. We would have these horrible storms.
Yeah.
And you'd be
Oh, yeah.
wandering around in mud up to your ankles.
Yeah,
Yeah, that whole event has
It's
really
evolved
evolved
into
It
into
a
totally
great,
has
yeah.
great place now. It's really fantastic.
A lot of stuff has evolved.
Yes.
Over time. And I think if you
But
can
we were
step
putting
back and
up
look,
that
yeah.
tent one time, once upon a time, over on the lake. It was for summer sale, and it took a lot of people to put it up because
Oh,
it was
yeah.
an old tent, and you'd put the thing under it, and you'd have these cables, and I was standing there, and I think it was Paul Manahan, remember Paul Manahan?
Sure.
And he says, "Here, wrap this rope around you." So I'm wrapping the rope around me, and he says, "Hold on, don't let go." And I said, "Okay." And old Tony Moffa, they sent him under the tent to push the center up, and they went up with such fierceness, I went over the tent and into the lake. And he goes, "Why didn't you let go?" I said, "You told me not to." That's when Ellen put his foot down. He goes, "You can't do that anymore." It was
No
my
more,
husband. "You
no
can't
more."
do that
Yeah,
anymore."
really.
That's
better
above and
be an
beyond.
aerial
That's,
act.
yeah, that's above and beyond the Call of Duty. We don't expect that from you anymore.
We
so.
had fun. We had fun.
Well-
Worked hard and played hard.
Well, you know what? That's good to hear. It's good to hear all these stories, and especially for people who haven't been around here, or for people who have, to remind them what it's come from
Sure.
and the work that so many people have put into it from all of the agencies and all the people
I'm
here
very
in town.
proud of it.
So thank you all for what you've done, and thank you for taking the time to talk to
All
us.
right, thanks.
Thank you.